Hello and welcome to The Blueprint. I am so grateful today to be joined by the amazing Ben Katt. He is a transformation coach, meditation teacher, speaker, and author of The Way Home. Welcome here, Ben.
Marley, so good to be with you.
Thank you so much. So I'm so excited. We have so much to cover, and you and I have talked like excitedly before we even hit record for like
Yeah.
45 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, so I would love to hear, first of all, just your story. You have a fascinating story about the different pathways that your career has taken. And also, you formerly lived in Seattle and now reside in Milwaukee. So would love to hear about, your journey, your path, and sort of what brought you to Milwaukee.
Yeah. So I see a through line through my story. So I'll begin with that because otherwise it can maybe not make complete sense. Though honestly, I'm still trying to make complete sense of it. That will be an ongoing process. But there really are three threads that I feel like are at the core of, my calling, my vocation, and those have been spirituality or inner life, community and belonging, and social healing or service, social change. There's lots of ways to talk about that. And in so I left Wisconsin after high school, went to Michigan for a bit. After a few years, after college, I got my Master of Divinity degree. It's a big title for, a degree where you study a lot of old books. The reason I went to that is I felt really called to, really just to help people, to accompany people in life, and ultimately help people and be on my own journey of waking up. So in 2008 or 2006, my wife and I moved to Seattle, and after a couple of years, started a church called Awake Church, which is still exists, and really that does capture kind of the heartbeat behind what I do. Um, I was there for about 10 years, and for a long time, I would have some hesitancy saying I'm a pastor because people's minds go to dogmatic thinking, control, um, rigid belief systems, things like that. And that's never what got me into it. What got me into it was, I think, two things. One is I grew up in a church where I felt surrounded by love. I felt like I was part of a family beyond just my immediate biological family. That sense of belonging left a mark on me and inspired me to be a part of cultivating that. The second thing would be that from a young age, I felt like I had encounters with the something more. These mystical experiences, which we could talk about what that means. But this sense of a greater presence. And fortunately, I was born into a home where my parents were Christians, and so there was a container. There was a container for that inner life, that spirituality, and it was the church. Now, um, as I grew up, of course, uh, my own spirituality sort of expanded beyond that container, which ultimately led to me leaving the church I had started, which I will say wasn't just, we had this sort of vibrant contemplative or inner life, but we also were a community of action. We were committed to our particular neighborhood in Seattle. We started a community center where we were building relationship and supporting people dealing with addiction, mental illness, homelessness, sexual exploitation, and prostitution. So it was this amazing chapter, amazing community, and yet at a certain point, and this is, yeah, a certain point, I felt that I outgrew it and I needed to step into the unknown. So after that, I was supporting other communities like that, neighborhood focused faith communities. But after a little bit, it was time to fully transition. So I left my ordination behind and had a brief stint with what's called the On Being Project, which the work of Krista Tippett was very, very formational for me, and conversations around what it means to be human and what's our role as human beings on this planet. Just really inspiring stuff. And I also started teaching meditation, which had become a really formative practice for me. So that led to, since then, a few other things. I mean, I teach meditation currently. This past year, I started an initiative called the Within Project. I teach meditation in prisons in Wisconsin and perhaps beyond eventually. And I've spent the last few years as a hospice companion, which really is still connected to sort of that pastoral calling, but just accompanying people, coming alongside people, specifically those at the end of life. So I both volunteered and then served as a chaplain. Um, yeah, and then writing and speaking are a big part of what I do, and then coaching. Really, a term, as I said to you earlier before this, it's like I don't always know if that's the right term because in a lot of ways I'm sort of a spiritual director, a companion, but it's also a bit like executive coach, life coach, etc. So terminology might fall short or elude me a little bit, but at the end of the day, I really know that my purpose is to help people live into their true self and shed the limiting layers and outdating patterns. And that, by the way, and we can get into this, that doesn't mean it's just sort of some individualistic quest. It's always about, in my mind, helping someone become more alive, more awake, so they can participate more fully in seeking the flourishing of all human beings and also the more than human world that we inhabit. So that's a bit of, my journey. Moved back in 2020 to Wisconsin. A little thing happened at the beginning of 2020, right? That kind of rattled all of our lives, COVID. And my wife and I just discerned that after a few years of questioning whether we were in Seattle for the long haul, it was time for us to take a leap and leave what had become really familiar to us, though that was once the great adventure was moving to the Northwest. And the new adventure was to actually move closer to family. And so that our kids could grow up by family, grandma and grandpa, and my brother and his family, and then East Coast family that we have. And we wanted a different pace, different cost of living, a whole host of things. We left behind the mountains. We miss those, but at the end of the day, Cherie and we're both Great Lakes people. So that's in us. She grew up near Toronto, so Lake Ontario. So there's a sense of a homecoming for both of us living here.
That's amazing. And I am so fortunate to have also met Cherie, and she seems like such an incredible human. So many things that you said there are, I want to dive in further on. And first, it sounds like throughout time, you have really embraced this concept, which also you cover deeply in your book, which is falling into the unknown and really, allowing the unknown to happen and to follow those breadcrumbs. So I'd love to hear more about, when you're in Seattle. And first of all, I was definitely listening to On Being in 2020 and 2018, and that work is
Yes.
so incredible. So amazing that you were a part of that also. But what was that, that sort of drew you away from Awake? And what were the catalysts, I guess, in your life, the moments in which you recognized that the unknown was calling you, and
Yeah.
how did you deal with the fear of
Yeah.
actually going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start sort of high view, which is to say, um, a lot of this is what I explore in my book, which is like part memoir, part guidebook. The subtitle for my book is Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife. And that hero's journey idea uh, is is from Joseph Campbell, the 20th century mythologist, whose work later became super popular in like movies and culture, specifically like Star Wars. But he studied cultures and religious traditions and stories and myths across space and time. And what he identified was this common storyline that runs through them all, which is this three-part pattern, which he identified as there's the departure, there's the initiation, and there's the return. And after I had gone through this sort of deep soul journey and leaving behind what was familiar and rediscovering myself, I looked and I thought at his work. I was engaging. I said, this is what I lived. So this isn't just something that's in old stories and traditions. It's something that's relevant for each and every one of us, which, by the way, is why it shows up in the myths, because it was those myths were there to serve as maps and help people understand this journey of becoming more fully human. So specifically, and this is related to the question about leaving and also the unknown, is um, part of where this chapter of my story starts is in 2014, I had left the nonprofit that our community started. It's called the Aurora Commons. That's where we were building community with our neighbors on the margins of society. Profoundly transformational, like received so much from them. We were all about reciprocity, mutuality. Everyone has a gift to give. Um, every human being is worthy of love and belonging. We have these beautiful core values and we live them out. However, during that process, starting a church, leading that, another nonprofit I was involved in, and Cherie and I had three young kids. Well, three kids in 3.5 years. In that season, I think in part because my work was so meaningful to me and it was impactful and I enjoyed who I was working with, something happened. And it's like my heart snuck out the back door and I didn't even notice. I was doing good things. I was in the helping professions, sort of engaged in quote unquote virtuous work. And I think I sort of fooled myself into thinking that I wasn't playing the game that's common to so many of us, especially in our society, which is that onward and upward, achieving, accomplishing more, growing in power and control. There was a way I was playing it, but just in my own way. And I had sort of, not enabled myself to see that. And so one morning, as all this is going on, like I'm just, you know, sort of slowly becoming more disconnected or more estranged from myself. I'm out for a run, Seattle rain, and I would often run around this small lake. And I was charging up this hill on my way home. I usually get to the top of the hill, I turn and just like crush the last 10 blocks, this sort of intense, invigorating workout, and then go about my day with all my important things to do and saving the world. And this one particular day, I got to the top of the hill and these words welled up inside me. And the words were, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. If you
Mm.
don't have your heart, you have nothing. And, I pulled my headphones out and I just like I knew right away what this meant. And it wasn't about my heart rate. My heart was fine. I was healthy in that way. But this was an invitation and really a warning telling me that like as a wake-up call. And it's telling me that the way that I've been moving through the world, my operating patterns could no longer serve me. They couldn't carry me forward. And in fact, while they may have been helpful at one point, which I think they were when I was younger, maybe, kind of wearing a mask, this producer, achiever, perfectionist, performer, it helped me kind of, make it through the world. We all have these masks we wear. At this point in my life, my, mid 30s, it was very clear that those ways couldn't carry me forward. So I walked home in the rain. I did not run. I crawled into bed, wet and sweaty, and I just wanted to stay there in a hole in a cave. That morning, that was my call to adventure, which is a concept Campbell talks about. That's really the beginning of the hero's journey, the call to adventure. So my journey to leave Seattle, to leave Awake, it began that morning, though it took about 6 years till I actually departed Seattle. But leaving, leaving the familiar. So these are my three phases: leaving the familiar, falling into the unknown, rising to wholeness. That's how I kind of organize Campbell's work, his phases. That's how I articulate them. The leaving was not just about a role or job or a place. The leaving was about leaving behind those limiting ways of being in the world. And so that shedding parts of my identity that were no longer serving me so I could more fully express who I am and why I'm here. So went on this soul journey, and yes, a part of then kind of the ultimate step of leaving the familiar is an actual letting go of things. Then you find yourself in the unknown, and the unknown is something we're not super comfortable with as a culture, as a society, and yet that space in between what has been and what's coming is uh, is probably the most powerful stage. It's where we really get free from what's hindering us. It's also something that recharges us for what's ahead, because there's a lot of work to do ahead from a more integrated place. It helps. It's a place of revelation. We get insights about what's next, what's needed individually and collectively. Um, and yeah, so many other benefits as, though it's super uncomfortable. Um, so that's a bit about, yeah, I guess the unknown, which there's sort of parallel terms. I talk about the steps in that unknown space are befriend the darkness and wander in the wild and ultimately face your death, really face your mortality. So a lot more we could talk about there, but that's probably hopefully gets at what you're asking.
Totally. And I mean, definitely dark night of the soul, ego death, like all aspects of versions of ourselves dying. And I think that what's so interesting to me is that, you were doing so many altruistic, beautiful, amazing things in your community, in consciousness for others. So those words and that epiphany is really interesting to me because the way that I sort of think about the heart and our relationship to it, I feel like oftentimes people who have deep awakenings or moments of that type of a realization are either in really transitional life moments of tragedy or death or birth or really huge moments, or they have such unrest with the way they're living, either the job they're doing or their relationship or what have you, that their heart like cannot stand it anymore. It's like
Yes.
screaming. and
Yes.
and your story is so unique because it's like on paper and to anyone looking in at you, you are doing all the heart-led type of work. So what a revelation. And it's interesting because those words, I think, my perspective is always that our heart is deeply, deeply connected to our soul and always accessible within us, always accessible to us. But with this circle of like lived experience, when we're in sort of a when we feel that separation or disconnection, even though it's illusory or an illusion, it still cuts and it still hurts and it's still deeply, deeply traumatizing. So what would you say? I mean, do you agree with that perception? Or, I guess, because
Yeah.
to me, the words like, if you don't have your heart, it's like, well, you always have your heart. But like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that perception is like cutting and
Yeah.
obviously causing you to crawl into bed and then, have a 6 year sort of unraveling.
Yeah. 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 I mean, so you really hit on all the things. So if we were to say, well, when does the call to adventure usually come, or how do we recognize it? You hit on all of them. One is we maybe are really discontent with our life, or we're feeling kind of numb, or we're going through the motions. This discontentment with some sort of surface aspect of our life, where we live, who we're with, what we're doing for work. Often the call to adventure also can come in any state of transition that, yes, you become a parent, or you become an empty nester. You finish a graduate program, or you get a new promotion at work, or you lose your job. And then there's sort of also the category of, as you named, like tragedy in a way, which is really an unexpected transition. So it's the loss of a loved one, a diagnosis, a divorce, whatever it might be. And all those things are signs. I think there are places to really listen and say, pay attention, like what am I being invited into right now? But usually we were just so caught up in navigating the surface level things that we're not paying attention to the soul level shifts. Now, after that morning call, and I would say my call to adventure, I describe that's a mystical moment. Mystical moment, again, this is sort of a broader definition, doesn't have to be just some insane vision, but it's like a sign, it's a
Yeah.
synchronicity, it's a sacred encounter, a spiritual experience. Those are all versions of a mystical moment. And so my invitation, my call to adventure came in that way, but all the other signs were there. I'd been ignoring them for months, for probably a couple years. And so, part of kind of breaking down, saying, well, what does this invitation look like? It's really important to do, because otherwise we can ignore, we can bypass. And the more we resist, guess what? Especially if a call comes and we want to resist it, we want to refuse it. The next one's going to be a bit more abrasive. Our life is going to be upended a bit more. And so part of why I wrote the book and felt like telling my story, which so originally something like the everyday hero, like every day was in my original title. Why? Because guess what? I don't have like a dramatic, everything falling apart story. I didn't have, it's not the kind of story we often, go see in movies or love, are the best-selling books of everything falling apart and then someone rises from the ashes like a phoenix. That's not my story. Kind of regular, ordinary, and almost, I think part of why I kept wearing my masks and kept pushing on was like I denied the fact that guess what? I too, as a human being, have experienced pain and loss, that and that my pain is needs to be tended to. If I ignore it, I will pass it on. And
Mhm.
so actually and I know there's so many other people like this. I don't have a dramatic story like that. So I guess I'm fine. Well, you don't have to just be fine. There's another way. You don't have to just survive. You can thrive. And part of the first step in acknowledging that is to say, and this is the first line of my book, and it just came to me. And I before I don't know how much I had written. I don't think I really had anything written, but this line was there. There are a million ways to lose your heart.
Mm,
There's more than a million, but there's basically the idea is like you don't have to wait to lose it all and everything fall apart. It's like you can acknowledge that even in some small way you sense there's something more for me, that like I'm missing. I'm not fully alive. I'm not fully living the life that wants to live in me. So it's never too early, I guess. It's never too late to begin the journey, and it's absolutely never too early. You can anticipate the fact that this is just part of life and aging and growing old and evolving. We're constantly leaving something, undergoing something, and arriving somewhere else. Where we are constantly invited to really evolve into a fuller expression of who we are, and that will inevitably mean that we have to say goodbye to some other version of us that has served us well, but is really no longer helping.
totally. And I love the phrase intentional evolution and intentional evolutionary, you know, behavior, intentions. I mean, I guess that's repeating the same thing over and over, but your framing of it being a call to adventure is such a beautiful, positive way to frame, you know, that unknown period. It really is a nice terminology. And I want to ask you regarding that moment, would you say that you had been in a state of maybe disconnection with yourself, like in terms of spending much time um, listening to yourself, being
Mm,
in, you know, nourishing yourself, loving
mm.
yourself? Would you say that
Yeah.
that had something to do possibly with that
Yeah.
moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I say to people is like, so say I have a call to adventure, now what? The really the most important, or if I want to pay attention to one that might be coming, well, what do you do? Well, you need to listen. You need to slow down. You need to get quiet. You need to allow yourself to reconnect with yourself, whether you have a lot of experience doing that or you don't. And there's all sorts of tools and practices. It's journaling and meditation and nature, especially time in the wild, whether it's like out in the middle of nowhere or it's just the park down the block. Um, Paying attention to your dreams. There's all sorts of things that are ways of helping us stay connected and or reconnect with ourselves. And the reason that I say that's like the first, those practices are the first thing to do, the way that's how you answer the call, that's how you say yes, you lean into those things, is because yeah, before that morning, while like previous to that, for a while, I had really good inner practices. I mean, this was like part of the work I do and
Mhm.
was doing, which by the way, that's part of what became the problem. I was like doing these inner reflection, supposedly, for work so that I could talk about it. So I could,
Mhm.
teach others about something
Yeah.
rather than it being about my own, just staying connected to my own heart, So um, I had had a journaling practice forever. And when I think back about that, at that season of life, what happened is I stopped, going inward in my journaling and reflecting, and it was more about going forward. So you could like look back and see, oh, suddenly I'm getting like, here, I have these plans. Here's the thing I'm gonna do next. It was all like visioning
Sure.
nonstop. And it's like there's a place for that, but we actually can get so caught up in looking ahead to what's next that we lose that connectedness to the present moment, which when we lose connectedness to the present moment, we are losing connectedness to self.
Totally. And how do you sort of work with the idea of your body as wisdom, your heart as wisdom, your mind as wisdom, and that, like, do you see those as interconnected pieces with all equal opportunity for a voice? Because I think a lot of what you're speaking to is also like a recognition of embodiment and like
Mm.
you've been doing these practices that are supporting your career and supporting your evolution in an outward way that others can see. But like, what is your body and your heart
Mm,
and your like, what is your
yes.
inner world saying? And I
Yeah.
guess, how do you think of those inner relations?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot. This is sort of the next area of writing that I have been doing for a while, maybe in my next book. But all that is to say, there's this teacher named Jesus who says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Jesus is lifting from an ancient Hebrew text when he's saying that, really an ancient commandment. And there's lots of ways to hear that, but in this last season, I've really heard it almost as if Jesus is identifying, so love God, love the oneness, embrace the oneness of everything, pursue and seek the unity of everything with heart, with soul, with mind, with strength, you could say, with body or with action. And Jesus isn't unique in this. If you look at the Vedas, the ancient teachings out of India, four of the main yogas, it's not just here what we do in the West and we go to a studio and maybe sweat and we've got Lululemon on. Yoga at its essence, at its core is about reuniting our individuality with our universality.
Mm.
So, and four of the main yoga paths are there's the path of the heart, devotion, bhakti, yoga. There's the path of the mind. You could say there's like the path of meditation. It's often called the royal path. There's the path of knowledge, jnana yoga, which is more like, really getting down to the fact that stripping away all your identities that you have to reconnect with that fundamental knowledge of being the oneness or being the big self, not just the small self. And then there's the path of action. That's karma yoga. And anyways, I see parallels between that, and you can find these in all traditions, and different traditions accent different paths. Now, ultimately, they are all intertwined. We are whole people, so we are interwoven with all those things, and so, and yet there's distinctions on each of those. So I think what's really exciting about just framing it this way is we can realize certain people may have a disposition to initially experience that connectedness with divine, with something more, slash with true self, with soul. Again, we can distinguish between all these terms, but I think initially I like to kind of say they're all synonyms. But there's a way we can, there's different ways we can, that are inroads, which that's awesome. It means there's not just this one way and all has to look the same. However, it also can be the case that if we get two in one, like part of our evolution and growth needs to be that maybe we expand out into, oh, you know what? I'm really kind of engaging this from, I'm like, I look back at that part of my life, like service or action. I was highly motivated, serving those in need. Um, but so much service that I was like it was about my need to be needed by others, and I was
Mhm.
losing that heart connection. I think sometimes you can become so devoted at a heart level, to this path that you can sort of slip off into like spiritual bypassing, and you're not really engaging the issues in your own life, and you're not really making a contribution to society. So I think you're spot on when you say, we are whole persons and there's these different aspects, and are they related? Yes, they are. And also, it's critical to kind of pay attention and say, there may be something of another way that we need right now, if we're starting to fall asleep.
Mhm. Would you say, with relative to your need to be needed, to me that sounds almost like the ego taking over the heart, being the leader in that scenario. And I guess that's just due to my straight up favoritism for the heart. I'm a
Yeah.
heart super fan, but that's like my beliefs are really deeply rooted in the idea that like bodies are a gift of earth and
Hmm.
are ancient wisdom in a lot of very mystical, our DNA. Um, I think that we all have access to a lot of information and knowledge when we're
Yeah.
quiet enough to be able to really listen. But the idea for me is that I have a morning journal practice that I love, and I have an evening meditation practice, and I try to sprinkle in whatever breath work or things that just are calling me. But a lot of times, like in the morning, I won't feel like doing my typical gratitude,
Mm.
writing, and then I just don't, or
Hmm.
I might, or like at night, I might not want to do my meditation. And I try just to like kind of check in with all parts of myself, like,
Hmm.
does my
Hmm.
body want to listen to that? Like, does
Yeah.
my heart want to listen? What do I just need silence? Do I
Yeah.
need to just go to bed? But I think it is so interesting because in today's society, I guess the way that I witness a lot of things, especially with consumption, is this intentional sort of buy these things so your body's better. Buy these
Hmm.
things so you don't age. Buy these things so that you fit in with the group. Buy this car. And it's all to me like implicit or implying that your body isn't good enough. You're not valid.
Yes.
And
Yes.
ultimately, none of that is true, of course, but that's where I think, really getting, I've thought of this week, and it was really the concept of like, until you really genuinely love yourself and you develop a practice where you are truly an inner haven for you, that like that's when your outer life begins to truly change. Like for me,
Yes.
that's when my reality really started to change to where I can experience awe and like amazement and wild synchronicities and these mystical experiences literally just walking down the street or going to the
Hmm.
grocery store, going to the farmer's market. So anyway,
Yes, you're like tripping all the time. No, so
right.
I absolutely, I mean, I'm all about heart. And I think all those other, there's so much more nuance to those things I said, but I think you're capturing the fact. I think our popular understandings of them are way off. So, for example, the path of knowledge, really at the end of the day, what it would be about, it's about saying, I am not this, I am not that, I am not my appearance, I am not the thoughts in my head, I am not the feelings I have, I am not Ben Katt, who's a coach and a author and a blah blah blah. I'm not my LinkedIn bio for sure. I'm not all these things. And that as we shed these layers, and this is a practice of like super deep contemplatives, it's almost like we shed like all these things, even separate ourselves from our own physicality, and we realize there's this beautiful silence at the core of who we are, which I would say again, that's sort of synonymous with that's heart. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, there is, or so, whereas our path of knowledge in society is it's about accumulating more knowledge. And you can especially see this in social media, in wellness culture. It's like, I just need to know all these other things. And I got this other certificate and I did this. And now I had this experience. Like it's about accumulating all this knowledge. And we actually are, instead of becoming less identified with all these external things, we're becoming more identified, which can really keep us from being in tune with who we really are. It can really be a distraction. And then similarly, the sort of path of action, or you could say body, even, you're totally right. Like that's some slippery space in our culture that wants to commodify everything and
Well,
wants to make us feel like we're less than. And so, guess what? If you're not putting the right skincare products on and you're not eating the right things, then apparently you're like becoming less human, which then creates a consciousness state where it doesn't matter, even if you're putting the best things in your body and you're putting the best things on your skin, you're probably going to be aging faster and your body's going to be in a like sort of deteriorating more rapidly. So yeah, I just really resonate with what you said there. That it isn't about all these externalities. It's really about coming into contact again with just that sort of subtle inner contentedness and quiet. Which, by the way, is why like meditation is my favorite thing. Specific kinds of meditation, because some keep us in our head. But there's ways to access that regularly, consistently, and not just do it when we're meditating, but then it becomes the type of experience you're talking about when you're walking down the street, which is like, I am all of it, and I'm connected to all of it, and what a gift.
I think you're speaking to the external validation, the pushing of external validation rather than that internal, you know, absolute knowing that you are enough. And I think for me, I perceive that the mind is almost the most malleable in terms of manipulation. And it's not that I think that, all the world is out to get us or anything like that, but I do think that capitalism exists for the function of profitability, and that is like really the leader versus human well-being or environmental well-being. And it's kind of its own entity that has become something that, you know, is rooted in psychological manipulation through advertising and marketing. And the only reason I say that is to be aware of, the ego was obviously created in service to keeping us alive back in the day. And now it has taken on a different sort of role in that being valid and being able to contribute and having the certifications and being smart enough is like kind of our version of the ego's way of trying to survive, or like,
Yes.
and a message that's come through clearly for me is like, so many people want to talk about every other leader and all these different thinkers throughout space and time. And there have been some amazing, incredible thinkers, obviously, and that's not to be a disservice to that, but also that we need to, in this now moment, really come back to ourselves. To what do we know? What do we know to be true within our hearts in
Hmm.
this now moment? Because there is so much information. And also, certifications are also a mechanistic form of capitalism too, where not everyone has access to education in those ways, and even can get out of states of having to work three different jobs due to the nature of, the way that our labor markets are set up. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think it's
and you might have the credentials, but if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. You might have credentials, but if you're not, like, you can wreak havoc on the people you're working with, you're trying to help, society in general. If you get so caught up in what the external thing, what you
Mhm.
have versus that quality of self-awareness and connectedness to heart, which is at the end of the day what people really need, is someone to invite them into that. And you can't take someone there if you haven't gone there yourself.
Wow. Yeah, I totally, absolutely agree with that. I'm all about the heart. Well, I want to ask you a little bit about sort of I know you've been on a retreat just recently. You have so many great, amazing opportunities coming up in 2025 to work with people. You've worked in jails, you've worked in hospice and in death transition. Would love to understand what you're seeing in your work. And I know
Hmm.
these are really very different expressions of lived experiences, but what are you observing? I mean, obviously, we're recording this in early February 2025, and there's a lot of chaos in the United States where we both live. But
Hmm.
what are you
Yeah.
seeing within humanity? Like, what are the messages that you're receiving and sort of what you're witnessing from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm going to try to weave my answer to that together with another comment on what you were just sharing, which I thought was really profound. But I felt like you were calling out the fact that we have our own personal journey that we're on. But again, it's always taking place within a broader system. And so, in my own journey, part of what I needed to come to terms with is like, yes, I need to shed my own masks. There's these operating patterns. It's achiever, perfectionist, people pleaser. Part of where that all came, yes, it was my own story. Yes, it was like my upbringing. Yes, it was my religious background, all these factors. And it also wasn't just my story. Um, I came across the work of William Jennings, who's a Yale Divinity School theologian, and he talks about this idea of, he called this like the really the goal of whiteness and education is this idea of mastery, possession, and control.
Mm,
Mastery, possession, and control. And when I read that, I realized, you could say patriarchy, you could say whiteness. I mean, these are all intertwined things. Or just you could say corrupt human, corrupt human expression. But this idea of mastery being like this, I got to dominate everything. Got to be the master. right? The control is I need to be in charge and I need to dictate how things happen. And the possession is I need to have everything, this insatiable appetite for more. And all those are very intertwined and overlapping. And I felt like part of my own story was the fact that I was, what I needed to shed was, oh, I'm actually living in allegiance to that as well in my own ways.
Mm,
And so in terms of any shedding that we have to do as individuals, we have to recognize those broader forces that are at play. And, as it relates, I think part of why I name those things is I have this idea of the hero's journey in my title, and that this powerful recognition of a pattern can also be manipulated and is often seen in our culture. It's like it's an individualistic pursuit. It's about achieving more. It's about becoming the master and being on top of everything and ruling, and this sort of thing. But actually, the hero's journey, as I write about it, is it's vulnerable, it's
mm,
compassionate, it's connected to nature. It is nature. It's service oriented. These are all the opposites of that mastery, possession, control. And in the spaces that I'm in these days, and I count it, it's a great fortune to spend time with people at the end of life. And I go into these nursing facilities, and let's be honest, a lot of them, they're not in great shape. And there's a lot of loneliness. People don't have families, or if they do, their families have kind of forgotten about them. Or I'm in prisons, and obviously you might have family visiting you, but you are on the edge of society if you're in a prison. Doesn't matter what got you there, you have been sort of cast out, right? And I go into these places, and or I was just at a retreat, and it was people who could spend a good amount of money to go to a really nice place, sort of exotic retreat center. Um, but I'm seeing the same thing in all these places, and here's what I'm seeing. I am seeing people like I see these nurses, I see these aides, I see the care. They might be exhausted, and guess what? Many of them are probably working many jobs. But when I can see the expressions of care and tenderness for those at the end of life who have all sorts of different identities from the caretakers, or I'm in prison and I see, yes, there's the system, and especially here in Wisconsin, it's just a mess. And it's really not about correcting. It's not about restoring. It's just punitive. But there are people in these systems, like I'm thinking of some of these project coordinators and social workers who are just like a bright light in these spaces. And I get to see all this, and it does give me this sense that like another way is possible, and not just that it is possible, that it's already emerging, and it always is emerging. So what's the story we're telling? Are we just telling the New York Times, CNN, Fox News story, which we say, oh, those are different stories. They're all telling the same story. Or are we going to tell this other story of like human connection and dignity and belonging and kindness? So I continue. Reminds me of something. I think Mr. Rogers tells the story about I think it was his mother, like in times of crisis and disaster and chaos. She said, I think she said to him, like, look to the helpers, right? So you can always look to the helpers. I'll tell you, they're out there. They're all over the place. Um, so that gives me hope. Yes, we still need to do something about the system, but if we can't stay connected to that reality of love, care, belonging, we're just going to repeat. We're going to repeat the same thing. So the one other thing I'll add is, I'm thinking of a phrase a friend of mine once said to me is by when he had this phrase, he called it the secrets of the powerless.
mm,
There are secrets, secrets of the dying. There are secrets of those incarcerated. This pure essential wisdom that comes through if we can slow down enough to just pay attention to what's happening in all the unseen places. And guess what? A lot of these people, they don't have any certifications. They haven't gone on any wellness journey, but they know from in their heart wisdom and a way of being that's more profound than many of us can even fathom. Okay, that was a lot, Marley. Sorry.
wow, that was epic. So there's so many, thank you so much for sharing all of that truth. And I have so many thoughts and reactions. I'd actually just recorded a blueprint where I was talking about what I call kind of the quantum. But I really deeply believe that there's like a frequency of knowledge that's available to anyone and everyone, and that we can access this wisdom because, and the reason for this is through space and time. And also, even right in this now moment, I see people thinking and feeling and knowing the same things that you and I are talking about here at the same time across the world. And it's not lost on me that when Donald Trump won, I heard this is an acceleration of the unity timeline. And the other day, the term community came to me as common unity. And it is really about the physicality of holding the hands with our neighbors, standing on Mother Earth on solid ground in common humanity and with common love for each other and with knowing that we as a collective are more powerful than any individuals or any governments or any entities. And the reason for that is to your point about the mastery, the domination of patriarchal or those types of intentions through time are so wild to me because they are rooted so deeply in fear and scarcity. Like they
Yeah.
originate when you want to control someone else so deeply, it's because you lack control within yourself. You're trying to mirror that fear, that deep fear that somewhere along your life and your existence, like I think of someone like Elon, where,
Mhm.
at what point in his life did he feel deeply unsafe or unseen or unloved in the world or by the world?
Mhm.
And I just try to figure out how to have empathy for that story, but it leads me to this space of like the masculine being out of whack, like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and that this masculine need for safety and control that stems so deeply just from fear.
Yeah.
It's not from a place of bravery or manhood or power. It's from fear and scarcity and a deep feeling that you are unsafe and it's a zero-sum game and you've got to win and everybody else has got to lose. So
Yeah.
I just I hope that other people feel, and I deeply feel the energy of collaboration, consensus, collective good, like it's surfacing. But unfortunately, in these times of chaos, community is where we can ground ourselves, but also um, chaos must precede new. We have to get rid of these energies and these structures and these ways of being and existing before we can replace them. It's like if we have a
Yeah.
pie, we have to take a piece of the pie out in order to, or eat the pie before we can bake a new pie. So
Yeah.
anyway, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my teachers, his name's Tom Knowles, and he teaches the Vedic worldview out of India, which, by the way, the whole premise is that this is knowledge written in nature. It's available to everyone. It's and has been made known across time and place. So it's not just like, oh, someone wrote a book somewhere a long time ago, and it's that anywhere there's truth and wisdom, it's tuning into that. So I hear what you're saying. Um, but he also talks about, in that tradition, there's these three main forces, and one is like there's like the maintenance operator, there's the destruction operator, and there's the creation operator. And often when we've been maintaining things for a while individually or societally, structurally, etc., um, we hold on too long, but things become irrelevant, which is what I was talking about with my own journey, right? These patterns, they help me maintaining maintaining them, guess what? No longer helpful. There's a time to depart and leave them, which means this like destruction energy comes in, which we look and say, oh, this chaos is terrible. This is horrible. And yes, it's like there is real pain. There's real pain. There's real tragedy. There's people suffering. So when destruction is happening, this destruction operator doesn't mean we abandon and say, "Oh, it's just got to happen." No, we actually need to go be there, accompany those who are suffering. However, it's really helpful to remember that this is a dynamic, and yes, it is what happens. It's the darkest night is before the dawn. This is the season that comes before newness and new possibility can emerge. So seeing things that way, which is like you can see them but actually you can just, we all live this reality. It's really helpful. it's a really helpful way to just help us navigate uncertain times.
Absolutely. And I want to go back in time a little bit and talk about the blueprint talks a lot about mystical experiences, and I have had a very deeply sort of mystical, but it almost got to a fear-based place when I was a child due to an energy that was in my house growing up that was not exactly of the high vibe type.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
anyway, I would love to hear about your early experiences with mysticism and then how you were able to hold those and sort of see those without fear.
mhm. Yeah. So I don't what comes to mind when I've answered this question before. I don't have like, oh, I had this incredible vision at this one time when I was 5 years old and in my bedroom or whatever. I would say my sense of like my mystical connection was really, it was about this like inner quiet. There's a part of me that uh, I liked being on my own. I can, and I, for a long time, I've generally been more extroverted, though I'm in my era of introversion and monkishness happily. But I just felt like there was a sense of I liked getting quiet. I loved, speaking of the tradition I came from, I actually really enjoyed it's like reading the Bible or like journaling a little bit. Like it just helped me tune into just a quieter, more subtle layer of myself and or connect with God, right? So there was that, but then um I do remember in high school, I started to have a few experiences where I really felt like one time I was at this conference at UCLA, and it was sort of a classic like altar call moment in a sense where, you get the preacher's talking and you sense the stirring and you come up to the front and there's all this, sometimes there's a lot of like language of fear and judgment. And that's not what spoke to me. I don't even remember if that was there, but there was this quadriplegic man speaking about how when he was 18, he got in this horrible like diving accident. He's been in a wheelchair ever since. And I was 18 and I was sort of, just doing my own thing. And yet, as high schoolers do. But there was something about that moment. I just really felt like this light, this like warm light inside of me, and felt like there was an invitation to something more. And the way I articulated it then was, Jesus was saying to me, "Follow me, and I've made you to be a leader." And so that's how I interpret it. And I mean, hey, sounds good even now, like whatever we want to call
Yeah.
all that, like. I mean, my life has really followed this path of, you could say, quote unquote, leadership, but I mean, like service and helping people wake up and following a calling, right? So there's that. And it was reiterated to me again when I was in a semester abroad in Spain. I had a similar experience. I was enjoying the discotecas, which, hey, that's fun. All good, all good. No judgment. And also, I guess I was just sort of screwing around. So, and what I learned is you can have all that fun and I like all whatever. Um, but I was losing touch with like my inner light, my inner life, and was on a park bench in Sevilla, Spain. Actually shared this with a dear friend of mine who had the same experience at the same time. And it was a
Wow.
similar message. It was essentially, and not, it was tender and loving and not judgmental. It was just like um, how about that path you're walking? A little bit like that. Like, is this the path? Because there's actually another path for you. There's a higher path, and it's gonna, as I discovered, it's gonna cost you, but it's gonna be the most fulfilling thing you could ever do to follow that path. So, those are in me deeply, for better or worse. I do think for better, but yeah, that's sort of why I can't help but escape this sense of calling I have on my life, which I don't think it's exceptional or anything. It's just that's how it's manifested itself to me, and I'm trying to live in accordance with that.
Well, I think it's exceptional. And I also think it's so beautiful. To me, it feels like you have never really disconnected from your inner light. Like it's always been very omnipresent. And I think I remember being a kid and having a lot of those like really connected moments with the universe, the stars, the moon, the nature, the grass,
Yeah,
the trees,
yeah.
which is so, so incredibly beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with hospice and with people as they transition, from life to death and what you witness during those amazing moments.
Yeah. So I, as a hospice chaplain, this is where I was more involved. When I was a volunteer, I had a few quote unquote patients, but I had something like, 2 dozen or more people that I would go see, not every week, but over the course of a month. And there's a whole spectrum. I don't want to romanticize it in any way. There's a whole spectrum of people, and there's a lot of pain and loneliness. And some people are, as a hospice chaplain, your role is you just come and say, "I'm here for you." A lot of people assume it's really religious, like you have, even they might kind of refuse the care initially because they think you've got some religious agenda. No, I don't. And that's not what chaplaincy is about. At the end, it's about companionship, supportive presence. And yes, if people have particular religious traditions, you can help facilitate that either directly or by bringing someone else in. Um, but I would say, so I would come in and um, I'd say most people would welcome me, and it took time to build relationships. And a lot of times, honestly, people did not want to really talk about anything substantial. And this is great for me. You know why? Because, sometimes you just watch like Ancient Aliens on TV or something. And fascinating, absolutely
So
fascinating.
good.
Yeah. So that's really good. Guess what? Because it's like, again, a reminder, it's not about me, because it is never about you.
Yeah.
And I'll say more about that in a second. It's not about me. I'm just here. And if I can just sit alongside them, they don't even say anything. But often what would happen is then some little thing would come out, some little comment, right? Ah, okay. Yeah, you just acknowledge it and just be there with them. But yeah, not about me. And this is a good reminder for anyone, whether you're like in hospice or as a volunteer, but if you just have like a loved one who's dying, this is why it's really important to do another incentive to do your own inner work and experience healing is and be connected with yourself at a deeper level. So when you're in these moments where loved ones are dying or loved ones who've hurt you, which is often the case too, um, we can get in the way. We can be an anxious presence. This interferes with what is the sacred experience of departing, of dying for the other person. It's not about me, it's about them. The more anxious energy I bring, the more I start making that person feel like they need to care for me. It pulls
Wow.
them out of that kind of tender, vulnerable, sacred, and powerful experience of transitioning. So, really important. I mean, that's just a sort of my little tip for anyone who's got a loved one dying is that you just start the work even now before someone's in that situation so that you can be, it doesn't mean you don't have grief. It doesn't mean you can't express that grief, but it does mean that there's something a little bit more stable about you among a sea of people who might feel really overwhelmed and anxious, including sometimes you know, those caregivers, nurses and whatnot who are maybe frantic and running around. So that's one observation I have. And the other is you do get you do get close to people's regrets. Everyone
Mm.
has regrets, just about. Most people do. But I think that's why it's really important and there's lots of great books about this, but pay attention to insights that people have received by, accompanying the dying. Because you realize at the end of the day, it's all about love. It's about belonging, kindness. No one's there saying, I wish I got a few more emails out, right? In fact, the second highest regret of the dying is like, I wish I didn't work so hard. And the
Mhm.
most common is, and this is from the work of Bronnie Ware, who was an Australian end of life caregiver. She wrote The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. I think that's the title. But she had a blog post initially, and it was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me.
Mm.
And so it's in that space where I feel like part of why I do it, it's my own practice. What am I offering? It's something, it's presence. But what am I receiving? I'm reminded of the gift of life and the life that I have, and it invites me to again and again consider how do I want to live? How do I want to be?
Wow, that's so incredible. And I about 5 years ago, a woman came and spoke to the company I worked at, and one of the exercises she had us do, which I put in the blueprint, was write a letter to you today from your 100-year-old self. And I think that's a practice you can do every year, but it's basically the things that need to come out about what you're doing in this now moment that isn't in alignment with what the dying version of you would
I
want
love it.
you to be doing, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
But you're seeing that and experiencing that. And I mean, I know that you have a lot of different experiences with different people, but would you say that there is a sense of like trust and belief in the process in the end?
I do see at the end, like, I mean, there's all these stages, right? And then people become, they're like unable to communicate. And some of them already are dealing with severe dementia and they really can't communicate. But with a number of patients, I didn't, you just, I witnessed like a softening and a release. And sometimes the statement of like, it's just so dark, it's just so dark. Um, and I don't try to say, well, I know it's going to happen, but there's definitely often there's a darkness, but then on the other side of that, there's like they start to sense like there's an invitation and there's like a loving presence or there's a light. So the releasing is just sort of it is coming back to the unknown, this in between. I mean, this is
Yeah.
part of what they're going through, and some deeper part of them there is a trust that not everyone can access, but a trust of like, oh, there is something okay on the other side, and then there's the release into that, which I think is really beautiful, and that's an honor to be around.
It's beautiful that you support them in that moment. It is beyond beautiful. I'm with authors, and I shouldn't say this to an author, but like that's I'm the same with movie quotes. I like can't remember, the names of books or the authors, but there were in one of the earlier blueprints, I talk about a woman who did a bunch of hypnosis on people in the 70s and 80s, thousands of people around the world about their experiences with birth versus their experience with like past life death. And it was really profound because people's experiences coming into life, into their baby selves, were far more traumatic for people than
Mm.
their past life passings were, because it's like consciousness from these perspectives, consciousness being crammed into a tiny body in the 3D plane
Yes.
versus consciousness being released from the density back to, love and um
Mm.
oneness, really. So I
Yeah, it's
thought that was
beautiful.
really profound.
Yeah.
But I did want to reflect something that you've said a couple different times about, your book being called like the everyday or the every
Mm.
some, which I think is so funny because to me you are so unique and so the things you have done and the ways that you see the world and the ways that you empathize so deeply with all different variations of humanity and, nature, God, Jesus, is so beautiful. And the way I like to kind of think of it is like every single one of us, our DNA is so unique. Like there's not two people, not even twins, that share the same makeup and the same being
Mm.
and the same perspective. And so I just, you along with everybody else, I think is such a unique gift to this world. And no one is,
Mm.
average,
Yes. Oh,
normal, or,
I agree.
you
Well, thank you for reflecting that back to me. And yes, I agree. That's part of what I say often and in the book is like that while this is so the hero's journey, this leaving, falling, rising, this is universal. It's really helpful to remember, right? It's a helpful map. But
and
each
it's
one of us,
cyclical. It
yeah,
happens over and over and
again,
over.
again, that's my 10th step. Begin again. There you go.
Yeah.
Start over. But also it's a universal path, but we all travel it in our own unique way. Uniqueness, that's absolutely true. Unique, we're uniquely who we are, and our callings are unique, and the contours of that, how we move on that path, are also different. And so there is no one size fits all, which is really important because there are a lot of I mean, books and podcasts and teachers and gurus and how-tos and all this stuff. It can make people feel like there is only one way and I have to get it exactly right, especially if you are like overcoming perfectionism. And that can be that can just stop you dead in your tracks. Like you're not going to make any movement if you think I just got to find the exact right thing. And this is where you and I agree is at the end of the day, hey, guess what? That map's really helpful. And I can't remember who said this, but the map is not the territory. At the end of the day, the territory, we all have our own. Um, I'm quoting a poet named James Pearson, newer poet, fantastic stuff, but we have a wilderness within us.
Mm.
And the way forward is within. That's what it is. The way to navigate that is within. We all hold the keys to that.
Wow.
So that's where going within, yes, there's practices that can help us do that. But at the end of the day, um, no one else can walk the path for you. No guru can give you the answer. No podcast can or book can spell it out for you. Though this one will really help.
Wow. Well,
Marley's podcast will help, but
oh my
you know what I
gosh.
mean.
This is such a fun conversation. And I think it's also like worthwhile to even bring in the concept of death as a practice in life, and that meaning that we are only limited by our own beliefs. So even if an old version of myself, I saw the world in perspectives and ways in which I don't agree with now, like those ways of seeing and being and showing up in the world do not define me, and they are not who I am and who my soul is. So like I can die. That version
Yeah.
of me can die, and I can start fresh in any now moment and any day. So it's
Yes.
also just worth remembering, like you are never defined by anything you've done, any
Yeah.
thoughts that you've had, any emotions you've felt, or any job, or so it's like so exciting because the I've died many times in my life intentionally. Like that version
Hmm.
of me is gone. And that's my
Yes.
goal, that every day, and
Yeah.
through all these different, tumultuous emotions and experiences, that my heart just continues, even when it breaks. My heart broke recently, and then
Mm.
I felt it open back up
Mm.
almost immediately. And that's
Yeah.
just my goal, is like just be heart open and be here for love, you know.
I see it. I see it in you. Yeah, I loved your ex. You talked about this. You have people think like when they're 100 and write back something to themselves now. Sort of another exercise related to what you're just talking about in terms of death is that I do with coaching clients or at this workshop this last week was writing a eulogy to your former self. So this is like the previous version. This is the mask you're shedding, the pattern that no longer works. It's the part of you that you've relied on so for so long, but isn't serving you anymore. And what's powerful about it is that you name what hurt, how it hurt you. Like so, this is an honest eulogy. We don't always hear these. It's honest, not oh everything was great, but how it hurt you. But also, you look closely enough, inevitably you will see all the ways this helped you, really helped you, and that there's threads that were there that you will carry forward. But overall, it's this part of you, yes, that this persona, this mask you've been wearing, it's not gonna help you go forward. But what also won't help you go forward is just condemning it and judging it and rejecting it and denying it. You really have to bless it, give thanks, honor it, say, hey, your work is no longer needed here. Peace out.
Wow. Yeah, and isn't it so interesting? It's like that version of us just deeply wants to be loved and acknowledged and seen, just like any version of us does, So I agree so deeply with that. I think it's really the running from ourselves is where we find ourselves in those moments
Yeah,
of where we cannot handle it anymore.
yeah, absolutely.
What a conversation, Ben. Thank you so much for this gift. I like can't wait for our next conversation.
Yeah.
What a treat. Thank you so much for being here. And is there anything else you want to share? I mean, you've shared so much. How can we
No,
how can
I
people find you and
Yeah,
buy your
people can
book?
find me. I will just say thank you so much, Marley. So people need to know we've been rescheduling this for months, it feels like. So, but this was the time. This is when it was supposed to happen. So,
Yeah.
really, really enjoyed talking with you, and um, you have like an amazing curiosity, and you're an encourager, and I just feel really great being here with you. So, thanks. As far as people finding me. benjamincott.com, last name Katt. Or even easier, go to thewayhomebook.com. That'll get you to a page for my book where you can learn more about that, but that's connected to my website. So that's kind of an easy inroad. And then by going there, you can find me in other places if you so desire.
Amazing. The book's incredible. You are incredible. Tell Cherie I said hi and look forward to the next time. Thanks for being here.
I'll see you soon, Marley. Thank you.
Bye.